He's jumping now to Revelation chapter 12, which has great significance because it's in our book of Revelation or the Apocalypse of John, and it appears with great prominence, right? It's not. Have you ever read? You're reading along in that chapter, and it just hits. What is this? This is like a spectacle, and it's a mystery.
Yeah.
And this is why the apostle says there's a blessing for just reading this book and trying to understand it. And for us who are Gentiles largely, and my wife's got Jewish blood, I'm sure there's other people here with Jewish blood. Just when that jumps out at you in the book of Revelation, it really is baffling to scholars too. And Edwin will tell you, because he studied, I'm sure, a lot, that so many writers in the early on when people were starting to write about prophecy more like in, the 17th, 18th century, people had an awful time with the book of Revelation, especially this particular prophecy. Now, it's like jumping out of the book at us, And so that's what he's dealing with. It's really is. It was for so many centuries a mystery, and now it's kind of at a gate, isn't it?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Can you see it in a telescope during that day?
Yeah, you actually won't even need a telescope.
Seriously?
If you know what to look for and where you're looking. This is the month of Elul, the 6th month on the Jewish calendar. It's known as the month of the bride.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So the constellation that appears is Betula, or the Virgin. It's the month of the bride. So if you know where to look in the night sky, you'll be able to see it on the naked eye. But you can also use a telescope, obviously. Yes.
I have a question about the sign, because this Revelation 12:1, which is mid-tribulation, how does it apply to the moment that it's happening? Is it a possibility that the tribulation may begin, with this sign in the sky, or how do you see that?
Well, that's an interesting question because, Pastor Moon?
Yeah.
Ever met
Yeah,
Pastor Moon?
yeah.
Pastor Bruce.
Pardon me?
Pastor Bruce Moon.
He actually is a mid-trib person. So he believes that the church will actually be on earth till the middle of the time of Jacob's trouble, which would be 3.5 years. Whereas if you're a premillennial, you would believe the church would be raptured at the beginning of the time of Jacob's trouble.
Mm-hmm.
So Jacob's trouble was 7 years because of Rachel and Leah and Laban, what happened. You remember the original incident, right? Why they call it time of Jacob's trouble. Everybody remember the time of Jacob's trouble? In
Yeah.
Genesis?
Yeah.
So many people see the Revelation 12 sign as a mid-trib event.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason they do it mentions some interesting numbers, and that is it mentions 42 months, 3.5 years, and it's interesting that many people see that as a mid-trib event, which would mean that if that is mid-trib, it would mean that for the last 3.5 years, this has really been tribulation for the church.
Exactly, which is wrong. Yeah.
Now, what's also interesting is because we're Americans, we tend to look at prophecy through an American prism or American glasses. And what is tribulation and what is wrath? So when God's wrath is poured out, the prophets say that nobody will be able to stand in that day. That there'll be massive destruction. Which means that it's probably not wrath, it's tribulation you're thinking of. So wrath is such that the mighty men of the earth that have all the resources actually try to hide in the mountains and the caves and the dens. That's how bad of a day it is. It's not a regular type of event. It would mean you're running for your literal life. So most eschatologists would say we're not in wrath. We're in tribulation, we're in persecution, but we're not in the time of God's wrath. But that is an interesting point.
Yeah.
I would say the majority of eschatologists are still premillennial. But it seems like a lot of people are starting to go to a mid-trib position based on what the difference between tribulation and wrath is.
Yeah.
But, in Syria they're crucifying Christians. There's very few Christians left in Syria and Antioch. So that's certainly wrath to them. But he's not talking about individual wrath, he's talking about global wrath. which means when the day of the Lord actually comes, it's going to be so obvious.
Mm,
It's going to be global. It's not going to be regional. It's not going to be local.
exactly, yeah.
But isn't it gonna be 3.5 years of peace first, so it won't seem like tribulation, but it will be called that, but it won't seem like it maybe? And
Right.
then-
But most people are looking for some type of covenantal agreement between a great Japhetic nation and Israel. Now, the only thing going on right now that would even mirror that is what Jared Kushner is trying to do
Yeah.
Yeah.
behind the scenes, which is another interesting thing. We can't go off on a tangent though,
He's Jewish too.
but it's interesting how that actually is playing out prophetically with Benjamin Netanyahu.
Now, in that light, about that specific topic, you know, in the book of Daniel it says that he will confirm an agreement with many. See, you know, it gives me the impression that the agreement already exists, and he's only going to confirm it. And as I was, you know, in later days when John Kerry was trying to manipulate the whole thing, I mean, he went all over, you know, Muslims and Arab nations, trying to get them all together. There were, I think it was 57 in all, some 25 Muslims, I can't remember, 25 Muslims and 32 Arabs, or the other way around, I can't remember. But Israel wasn't even there. They were leaving Israel out, you know, which is like, you know, quite amazing that they will do that. So I'm thinking, what is it, what the men of lawlessness, the Antichrist, going to do, which he will come to an agreement with everybody, and then ultimately Israel will be pleased, you know, because obviously in Bible prophecy we see that they will look at this guy as their Messiah. But you know, I don't know. I just thought about that.
Maybe we can go, so we can get to the through the whole Revelation 12 revelation of the woman in the wilderness and who the child is and all that first before we discuss the timetable or the treaty or any of that, because last week I talked to a couple of people and they said I don't know if I get all those pieces of the woman in the wilderness, because I think that's that is the most difficult part of this for so many people who analyze it, don't you think?
Yeah, and a lot of it is cloaked in apocalyptic language and genre, where what is the woman, what is the wilderness. So what's interesting, if we go back to Revelation 12, is the woman is giving birth to a man-child. Now this is also happening in the heavens in the constellation. In fact, yesterday, Jupiter itself, with the retrograde motion, actually came out on September 11th. It is actually now out. Now, many people see this as the birth, almost like a corporate birth of the church.
Yes.
Whereas Pentecost would be more like a conception, the earnest of the Spirit.
Yes.
So this will be the fullness where God would expect man to be in his image, which would mean spirit, the Holy Spirit's in him. And that will be a corporate birth of the church, the man-child.
Wow.
You've heard of corporate Pentecost, that whole
Yeah.
concept
Yeah.
before?
Yeah. Wow.
Right. So that would be a sign of that the corporate church is about to be
Wow.
birthed at the end of the church. What's interesting is when the woman is going to escape to the wilderness and she has a place prepared for her, it's interesting because this is picked up from the Exodus when this actually happened, is they did actually leave and go out into the wilderness. And then Mary and Joseph also do the same thing. They're escaping from the dragon who is Herod the Great, who wants to kill all the newborns. So they're actually leaving too and going out to the wilderness. And it actually fits that pattern, because if you see when Herod died and when they're told in a dream to come back, it matches that time period exactly. So then again we see another time period when actually Israel, now this would be national Israel versus spiritual Israel, is going to have to deal with the fact that they did actually miss the Messiah, and that he did come, and that they missed him, and they're going to deal with the fact that they have to now deal with salvation during the time of Jacob's trouble. So all of this is going on concurrently. So the church is about to be raptured, spiritual Israel is about to be raptured or taken out. National Israel has to deal with the current conditions, and she's also going to have to flee the serpent or the dragon. And there's a flood that comes out of the dragon's mouth after the woman, and it matches perfectly Pharaoh chasing the Jews out of Egypt. So they're going to remember this metaphor from Egypt, and they're going to see it's referring to them.
And that would be the Antichrist going
Yeah.
after them.
And Pharaoh is a type of that.
Yeah. Or they go to Petra. And
Yeah, the Petra area, which it's also known as Basra, the sheepfold. Petra would be, in Obadiah, it talks about how Edom made his nest in the cliffs of the rocks high up. So that would be the hiding place for them for a period of time. That would be national Israel. And many of them will have to flee to safety during that time period. But what's interesting, the serpent or the dragon is also chasing those who also have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Which means there are people that are coming to salvation during this time period. He's also searching out those people, the remnants that are getting saved.
Gentiles or?
Yeah, that are getting saved at that time period. And you also would have the people who were sealed prior to that, the 144,000 who are evangelists who are witnessing. And those people are coming to the saving knowledge of the Lord Jesus Christ at that same time period. Now, what's also interesting about this is, as you read, as this goes on, as it transpires, as the woman's fleeing, it says that the earth actually opens its mouth and helps. So the earth there is referring to Israel, which means Israel has enormous power to fight back at this time. Now, where would that power come from? It says that Michael the prince actually stands up and starts to fight for Israel, which would mean there's angelic war going on in heaven, and there's also a war going on the earth, where Israel is fighting the way Michael's fighting in the heavens. In Daniel 12, Michael stands up, and in Revelation 12, Michael stands up. There's a parallelism there between your chief prince that will fight for you, stands up and fights for Israel.
Like 6-day war stuff.
Yeah. And if
It
you
was
talk,
miraculous.
yeah, if you talk to any of the generals that were actually in the 6-day war, they describe things that sounds like something out of a movie, of a sci-fi movie. But and many of them are actually atheists. But they say, but I know what I saw.
Wow,
They
they
still-
saw the angel.
wow, yeah.
Pretty cool.
So it wasn't the 6-day war. For what I read, some article on Israeli magazine, that some Egyptians did see angels, and they got such confusion, they started killing each other,
Yes.
just like the Old Testament.
And what happened is a lot of the Israeli generals were watching that, and they saw it. They saw the confusion, and then when they looked back, they saw what the Egyptians were seeing behind them.
Oh,
Wow.
wow.
And they said it was amazing that all of a sudden it was clear the tanks were coming right for them, and they looked back and there was a giant sandstorm just coming out like a wave over them, going right down and hitting the Egyptian
Wow.
reinforcements. And it's interesting, if you look at that war, the belligerents who were fighting on the side of Egypt, you had Cuba there, and all the nations were fighting against Israel. And they even knew that they were losing the battle. But it did turn in their favor, and many of the generals, I used to drink coffee with one of the Air Force pilots, and he said, some of the things I saw I don't want to talk about. He said, I saw them.
Wow.
But yet he's still an atheist.
See? Oh,
Which is
okay.
interesting.
Wow.
He's still an atheist.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so getting back to this, what's interesting about this is right now the church is interested in Hebraic things as it was at the very beginning of the church age. So many people see these festivals that are occurring now throughout history as a way of judging time and prophecy. For example, let me just give you an example of what I mean. Christ, the resurrected Christ, is on earth. Does anybody know what day he ascended? Christ actually ascended.
10 days before Pentecost.
And that's the day Noah comes out of the ark. Exact same day. It's the 27th day of the second month. So it's about ascending and descending. And what do the angels tell the apostles? That just like Christ ascended,
They will
he's going to descend at the same time. Now why that's interesting is this, is Pentecost season contains a day from Abib 17, the day Christ actually rose, and 50 days later, each day has importance on the Hebrew calendar. You have to count the Omer.
Yeah.
And when they're counting the Omer, they get to the 27th of the second day of the month, and that's when Noah comes out of the ark. And then there's a 10-day period. But that last day that Christ ascends is the 120th day of his life. Christ has 3 40-day periods associated with his spiritual life, just like Moses had 120 years. So the first 40 days would be during his dedication after his circumcision, the purification, right? The second 40 days when he goes out into the wilderness, the way Israel was out in the wilderness for 40 years, he's out there for 40 days. And what he's saying is, I'm taking over where Moses left off. So Moses was in the wilderness. I'm coming back after 40 days. I'm the Messiah. Moses was a type of the Messiah. And he's coming back across the Jordan and saying, here I am, here's your Messiah. Just like Joshua marched in, he's marching in a triumphal entry. And the last 40 days is after his resurrection. He leaves earth on exactly the 120th day. He ascends, okay, in the Spirit. Now Moses couldn't do that because when he died, Christ took the Spirit out of him, and Moses is on the mount.